Hey everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nissa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. I have a video, you're gonna see me in similar outfits for a few videos here because I'm recording them all at the same time. But this video is about my English muffins mainly. So I was testing out a couple of different recipes for English muffins because I normally made them sourdough, and I haven't been able to make sourdough ones because I just haven't been able to get my starter working. So I've been doing some yeasted ones, but I really don't like too heavier English muffins. Like, I don't really want the ones with egg in them because I find that they're just too cakey and it doesn't work for me. And I don't like it when it's all the liquid is milk either, because again, I find that a little bit too heavy. I much prefer them to be more of a chewy bread product, a soft bread product, but a chewy one rather than cake-like. That's how I describe it. I don't know if that's particularly an accurate description, but that's how I like it. So I've been working on a bunch of different recipes to get my ratios right, the size of them right, and the quantity right in the batches, and I've shown them a bit over the last couple of weeks, and I decided that I'd do a really big batch up once I was happy with it and do a video to show you that. I also have other meals in the day. We did English muffins, but I also made pie dough from scratch and a pie, so I thought I'd share that in this particular video as well. And so let's get into it. So part of the aim of the English muffins was so that it was nice and light, so I didn't want any egg in it. I also wanted to use a whole tin of coconut cream, so I didn't have half a tin sitting anywhere, because you're not supposed to leave it in the fridge in the tin. And then when I pour like half a tin into a jar, it tends to not get used. It tends to end up going bad because we forget it's there, or it's not labeled, or whatever else. So what I've done is I've created the recipe around needing to do those things. So I did a 400 gram tin of coconut cream with 400 grams of warm water. Now the temperature of your water is going to be variable. I can use it pretty hot at the moment because my coconut cream is pretty much solid, so it's going to reduce the temperature of the water, but you don't want to go too hot because too hot of water will kill your yeast. So you need it to be warm, tepid, but not hot. I use 15-20 grams of yeast, a couple of teaspoons full sort of thing, and 80 grams of olive oil or melted butter or fat of some sort. Now, melted butter is going to seize up if your water's too cold and things like that. Olive oil stays liquid until you get some pretty cold temperatures, so it's always easier for us to use. 20 grams of salt, 40 grams of sugar, and 1100 grams of bread flour. Now, you can use other milks for this. I use coconut cream because I have it, and that's what we use regularly. I am using coconut cream, not milk, so it is higher fat content than if I was using, say, cow's milk or something like that. But again, I don't think it would matter. You're just looking for half of that dairy and half water just to keep them sort of light. I tend to make 2 of these batches, so I can only do 1 in the KitchenAid at a time. My KitchenAid only tolerates 1100 grams of, that's the sort of the other reason for the ratios. 1100 grams is about the absolute max that my KitchenAid will tolerate. It's a bowl lift one. I think it's like 5 quart or something. It's an old model. They don't sell the same one anymore, and I can't get replacement bowls, which is really annoying. But the 1100 grams is around about the maximum amount of flour that I can go without it splashing around everywhere, and to make sure that it all comes together into a nice dough. So I make this in 2 different batches. I mix the first one up. I use the KitchenAid to get a nice dough, climbs the dough hook in the middle, and it comes away from the sides mostly. Being a yeasted dough, and a dough that I'm going to double proof, it's not that big a deal that it's all, pulls away from the sides, but we want it to pull away to a degree and climb the dough hook. Once I had both batches done, I stuck them in the big Cambro container that I have mentioned a few times recently that Susan got for me, and it works perfectly for about 2 kilos of dough, which is, a double batch of most things that I make. And then I stuck that in the proofer to do its first proof. While it was proofing, I made up some pie dough for dinner that night. So, I could just make this video entirely about the English muffins, but I may as well throw the other stuff in there while I'm doing it, because the English muffins have this downtime, and so I've used my downtime appropriately. So I made a pie dough up for dinner that night. I do a lard olive oil dough. I do 400 grams of flour, 60 grams of lard, 60 grams of olive oil, and 110 grams of chilled water with a pinch of salt. I put it all into my Thermomix and I run it at like speed 4 until it comes to that small ball stage where it's all got lots of little tiny balls. I tip that out and roll it into more of a homogeneous sort of a ball. I split it into two, one side slightly larger than the other, and put it in a Ziploc or airtight container to go in the fridge, pulling it out about 30 minutes before rolling it out, depending on your ambient temperature. You do want it to soften a little bit when you pull it out, but this is a very forgiving dough. I made 2 lots of the pastry because that will then be a top and a bottom for 2 different pies. I hadn't decided whether I was making 2 beef pies at this point or whether I was doing like an apple pie and a meat pie, but I thought I may as well make up 2 lots, and if I don't use the second lot of pastry, I can always put it in the freezer and use it at another time. Once the dough had bubbled up nicely and domed on the top, sort of doubled in the Canberra container, I tipped out a portion of the dough onto the dough mat. Now, because we used warm water and we're using the proofer, so we're proofing it at a fairly warm temperature, your dough is going to be even more slack than if it was cold. This is not such a bad thing in an English muffin dough so long as it's not sticky, and this isn't a sticky dough, but is definitely slack and loose. But because we want our English muffins to spread outwards as well as give a little lift higher, the slackness of the dough actually benefits us in this particular instance, because if it was too springy you wouldn't be able to get it to flatten out, it would just keep bouncing back. I ended up going with about 75 gram bowls, so I did a couple of test runs of this recipe and did different sizes, and I found that 75 grams was around about the right size. You could go smaller if you wanted. It depends on how you're going to eat them. So if you wanted to portion control it better and you were the type of person who eats your English muffins with jam or something, then it really doesn't matter what the size is. But I found 75 grams was a good size to get around that would fit an egg and like the eye of a piece of bacon on it. Like, it just felt like it was the right shape for fitting that sort of thing on, and that's the intent, is this was to have with sausage patties or bacon and eggs or things like that, and that's the size that I'm going for. Using some semolina on the scales to stop it sticking, as well as baking paper and a bit of semolina on the baking trays. I rolled them into balls the way I do all my buns and anything that I do this kind of thing. I pinch all the sides underneath so that the top of the ball is nice and smooth and it's sort of taut. And then using the motion of my hands or on the table, some people use the table to do it, we're going to create tension. So we're going to keep the top of the ball nice and tight and taut and tensioned, but get the underside to stick to itself using a little flour if you need to get it nice and smooth and not sticking to your hands, but you don't want to introduce too much flour because you want that dough to stick to itself. So I use sort of a scissor motion almost with my hands to keep that top nice and drum tight, but get all those bits of dough underneath to get into a nice smooth sort of a section as well. It's really not that important in these particular things because they're going to be cooking in a pan, not in a oven, and you're not scoring them, but it's still nice to have that consistency with it. As I place them on the baking tray, I tend to give them a really firm push down. We want these to proof for a little bit longer now that they're in the ball, but we want them to spread a little as well, because the height is less important. It's going to have some oven spring in the pan, but we want them to spread out so that they're the right round size for what we're using them for. I repeated this with all the dough, filling tray after tray with the balls. You get around about 27 or 28 muffins out of one batch of the dough. I did a double batch, so I end up with about 55, 56 all up, which isn't all that many when we eat 16 in one sitting, but is still sort of 3 meals worth, which is the idea, is that we can have, even if we eat one day, have the leftovers the next day, and then I put a meal away in the freezer for another day. The problem with making freezer meals for the quantity of people that are eating them becomes how much we eat in one sitting, and then how much space it takes up to bother freezing. Yeah, anyway, it becomes challenging. I had defrosted some pork mince. I'd minced this up from one of the roasts earlier in the month and frozen it in about 2 kilo lots. This was a nice coarse grind, plenty of fat. I decided to make sausage patties for the English muffins, which is something I'll probably do again next month when I try and make some of these for easy breakfast and stuff, because it's a good use of the pork. I added about 40 grams of salt, which is about 2%, about 20 grams of cracked pepper, which is about 1%, and about 40 grams of maple syrup. I do 80 grams of smoked paprika, which is about 4%. We like this on the higher side, or I do. And about 20 grams of rubbed sage. Sage is a taste that you like or you don't like, so you need to be careful with the amounts of that until you've tasted it. We blended this through well, emulsifying it a little as we went because we want this to hold together as patties. Karvik wanted to give me a hand with this, so he was trying his hardest to get it emulsified as well with me. It was a little difficult though because the pork still had a few frozen bits in it and it was very cold on the hands, but he did his best to give me a hand with this. We got it all blended through and I cooked a little piece off to taste test, which is really the only way you're going to see if it's seasoned enough. You can't judge this unless you taste it. So I regularly will mince up this, like when we do sausages and stuff, I do the same thing. I'll mix up all the mince for sausages and then I'll just cook off a little of the mince and taste it before I decide whether it's good to go or not. And the same thing with this sort of breakfast sausage mince, and it's basically what it is. It's sort of a breakfast sausage mince. Daryl approved of it. I thought it was quite tasty, so we got on with the muffins, which had now rested for a while to second proof. There's not a whole lot of difference in that time. You're only sort of giving them 15-20 minutes, but it allows the dough to relax again and get a little puffy on top. It domes up a little bit on the top and just gets a little more loose and allows for some air pockets in between. We stick them in a dry cast iron pan with a lid on, time them for about 5 minutes at this size, and then flipped them. Now you can cook these in the oven. You can even par cook them on the pan to get the color right and then finish cooking them in the oven. But I find it easier just to have both pans running and getting them all done at once. It takes about 5 minutes each side is what I find, and it creates that really nice dark round patch on the surface of them, which is what reminds me of like store-bought English muffins. And you don't get that as much if you do it in a baking tray. But if you par cook them in a baking tray, you do. But that seems an awful lot of double handling. I like the crispiness of them cooked off in the cast iron. That crunchy factor from the semolina works really well. I prefer them done in a pan. I have baked them and it does work and it's fine if that's how you would like to do it. And I suppose with the new oven I could bake a whole lot at once, which might be worthwhile, but I do prefer them cooked off in the cast iron. I just like the texture better, the difference between that really crisp outer and the soft inner. I just find it works really well, and I think that they puff up better in the pan. Now I feel like I should have more footage here of making these and even a photo of a pile of 50 English muffins, but I don't seem to, and I'm not sure why. But I will be making these over and over again, especially this month. We're going to put some in the freezer and things like that, so I will make them more and you'll get to see them, so you know that's what it's going to do. Once we got all the muffins cooked off, that was the other thing. We looked at time. You know, I think that the pans are worth the time. It takes about 5 minutes for each side, made about 55 minutes. I can fit 9 in my square pan, 6 or 7 in the round pan. We're only talking approximately 40 minutes to cook the whole batch. Like, there's the time to roll them and everything before that, but that's the same for any bread product. I think that's not bad for, you know, 3 to 4 meals of English muffins to take about 40-45 minutes of hands-on cooking time to get the result that I got and the quality that I got. I find that worthwhile. After that, we cooked off the sausage patties. About 60-gram balls is what I did. Just flattened them out a bit in the pan and cooked them off. Super tasty, super simple, and a great use of pork. Karvik really enjoyed helping to flatten them out and then flip them and things like that as well. These reheat really well too, which is great. So I just cooked up all of the pork that I had into the patties, and then we had the patties available for the next day too. Normally I'd have eggs on these as well, like bacon and egg muffins, like McMuffins, the McDonald's ones, or sausage and egg muffins and things like that. But again, we're low on eggs and I'm being picky about where we use the eggs and what I use them for. So we just had them with some mayo, some apple butter barbecue, and the sausage patties. It was really, really tasty though. It just, yeah, it was a very filling and satisfying kind of a lunch or breakfast or whatever you want to use it for. Then for dinner, today was a good food day. We had the pies. So I made up 2 batches of that pie dough, so I had 2 tops and bottoms. I had pulled a bag of steak and mushroom pie filling out of the freezer to defrost, and that's what I was using. So I had made this pie filling last, I didn't make it in this cooking, like in this 2-month period at all. It must have been made in the period before, and I found it in the freezer. It wasn't labelled, which is, you know, silly of me. So I was using that for the pies. It had been defrosted and it was mostly defrosted. It was still a little icy, but it was mostly defrosted. I used a little flour and rolled out the base of the pies. Now, I am not an expert pie crust roller, but this crust is amazingly forgiving. It's partly why I like it. I have had so many issues with crusts. I have done so many different variations with it, and if I overhandled them, they ended up getting far too short and crumbly and just not great. This mix of olive oil and lard lends to a very sort of forgiving dough that lets me fix my mistakes as I roll it out. Like using a little bit of flour as needed, I just manipulate it into approximately the shape I need. Both the dishes I use for pies are ceramic lined cast iron and are quite deep. These are like good deep family pies. So I use the rolling pin to transfer the dough from the mat into the dish, and I smooth it out, gently manipulating it as needed to fit into all the nooks of the pie dish and still have a bit up over the sides. I can tear excess off the sides and push it into spots of the pie, and it works fine. It's, as I said, it's a very forgiving dough, and that's what I love about it. But the texture of it when eating it, it's perfect. It's a perfect short crust pie. I filled it generously with pie filling. You want your filling to dome slightly in the middle so that as it cooks down, the pastry doesn't sink. Your pastry will always cook better and look browner and look nicer if it has a little bit of a dome shape to it. I trimmed the edge and then just using 2 fingers and a knuckle to gently and very inexpertly flute the edges of the pie dough. My pies are very tasty, but they're not always pretty. All I'm doing here is making sure that there's a rim or an edge to the pie crust so that when the filling of my pie inevitably tries to escape, it doesn't escape all over the hot plate on the barbecue. I put a slash in the top for steam to escape and repeated the process, putting them both in the oven for about 40 minutes, using a probe to check the internal temperature of the filling, just for, you know, knowing that it was cooked through and nice and warm. We served it up with some mashed potato. The pie filling has carrots and stuff in it, but I had left potato out of the pie so that I could serve it over mashed potato because that's always tasty. My pies always end up fairly wet, full of gravy, which is the way I like them, but means that they're not as attractive to look at quite often and they don't come out of the pie dish very well, but it pairs really well with mashed potato. That is my English muffin recipe and the way I make the pies. Now, the English muffins have been a winner. I used to make them out of sourdough, and whilst we enjoyed them, I did find them a little heavy. I did find them, yeah, just they're a bit much. These are much lighter. They are very, very light. They reheat fantastically the next day. They stay crispy on the outside, but they get really soft in the middle. Toasted, cut in half, split in half and toasted is how we've been doing them the next couple of days, and they've worked really well. I haven't tried, so the idea is that I'm going to try and buy some middle bacon this month and do bacon and eggs. I might like sheet pan the eggs or something so that I can cut them and put them on with the bacon. I'll see how I go. And I'm going to have to buy some eggs, I suppose. And eggs are apparently, there's limits on how many eggs you can buy, so we'll see. But I might try putting the bacon and eggs and wrapping them in parchment or foil or something. Foil maybe. At least foil can be recycled if you keep it all together. Anyway, I'll figure it out, and then wrap them and freeze them so that I can use them. We can try reheating them. The thing is the reheating. So ideally it would be good to use the air fryer, except that at breakfast time we don't have the power for the air fryer. So realistically we have to use the oven, and I just don't know how well they'll heat up in the oven. I'm going to have to test the theory and see how it goes, and we'll figure it out. If it comes to it, I just freeze the English muffins with no filling and we toast them and make the filling at the time. And it was just trying to make things a little bit easier to have so the kids had some filling choices other than porridge, which they're happy to eat, and I've been bumping the protein in the porridge and things like that. Some other choices, but for us as well, if I'm busy, Daryl can just heat some up and it's like I'm eating a fresh made meal sort of thing. So anyway, if you give it a go, let me know. Lots of people have said they've tried the French bread, which I put out the other day, and are having some success with it, which is fantastic because I work really hard to make sure that these recipes work consistently before I share them, because I hate if people fail with like if the recipe fails when they try it. So thank you for joining me again today, guys, and I will see you on the next video.